Dead America, Tales from Las Vegas, The Fight for Nellis, by Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. The moon hung high in the air as Captain Foster stared at the security camera monitors in the command center on base. The screens flickered with grainy footage, each one showing a different section of Nellis. Most of them displayed the same thing: zombies. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, shambling through streets that should have been filled with military personnel going about their duties. It had been 20 minutes since Private Carver had begun his diversion at the warehouse just across from the base. Foster had watched the young soldier haul speakers and equipment up to the roof, setting up what he hoped would be an irresistible lure for the creatures wandering the grounds. The plan was simple: blast music loud enough to draw them away, create a path for Foster and his team to move through. Despite cranking the music to its maximum volume on top of the building, it struggled to reach the base, at least in any significant way. The distance was too great, the sound dissipating before it could do much good. Foster could see the warehouse on one of the monitors, the tinny sound of music barely audible over the systems. While there were hundreds of zombies at a minimum wandering around the base, only a few dozen had taken the bait and shambled towards the front gate, and most of them were hung up on it, unable to find the narrow opening. They pressed against the fence, their bodies creating a grotesque wall of dead flesh. Some clawed at the metal, their fingers catching and tearing on the sharp edges. Others simply stood there, swaying slightly, drawn by the sound but too stupid to navigate around the obstacle. The radio on the desk crackled to life, making Foster reach for it. "Captain Foster, do you copy?" Carver asked. Foster pressed the button, his thumb white from the pressure. "I got you, Carver," Foster said. There was a pause on the other end, filled with the distant sound of music and moaning. When Carver spoke again, his voice carried disappointment. "I'm sorry to say, but I think more zombies have come over from the buildings behind me than from the base," Carver said. Foster watched the monitors showing the warehouse area. The private was right. A cluster of creatures had emerged from the surrounding structures, drawn by the noise. The captain let out a breath, pushing down his frustration. "It's all right, Carver, we'll manage," Foster said. He tried to keep his voice steady, not wanting the young soldier to hear the defeat in his tone. The plan had been a long shot anyway. Carver came back on the radio, his words rushed. "Most of them are congregating around back. I can get the truck out and drive around, maybe draw more of them away," Carver said. Foster interrupted the young private before he could finish the thought. "No, Carver, it wouldn't do much good. And besides, I want to save that card for when we really need you," Foster said. "I understand, Captain. I'll be on standby if you need me," Carver said. Foster could hear the resignation in his voice, the same feeling he was experiencing. The private wanted to help, wanted to do more than just sit on that rooftop and watch. "I appreciate that, Carver. I'll be in touch," Foster said. He tossed the radio down onto the desk in frustration, not pleased that his plan hadn't panned out. The plastic casing clattered against the metal surface, the sound echoing in the small room. As he continued staring at the monitors, seeing the army of dead shambling around the base, Sergeant Hansen knocked on the open door. The sound made Foster look up from the screens. Hansen stood in the doorway, his expression neutral, but his eyes asking the question before he spoke. "How are we looking out there, Cap?" Hansen asked. Foster gestured at the monitors with a sweep of his hand, encompassing all the bad news they displayed. "About the same as we were half an hour ago," Foster said. Hansen stepped into the room, moving closer to get a better look. He scanned the different feeds, taking in the scope of what they were dealing with. "Nobody has taken the bait?" Hansen asked. Foster typed on the keyboard for a moment, pulling up the front gate camera, which showed a few dozen creatures congregating around it. They pressed against the fence, their hands grasping at nothing. Behind them, the rest of the base remained thick with zombies, undisturbed by Carver's music. "That's all Carver managed to entice," Foster said. Hansen looked at the screen, letting out a sigh. He crossed his arms over his chest, the gesture resigned. "Well, at least the boy is a good cook," Hansen said. Both men chuckled before continuing, the brief moment of levity a welcome break from the tension. It was easier to laugh than to acknowledge how screwed they really were. "How are we looking out there?" Foster asked. "2 handguns, about 50 rounds each, and a couple of security batons, the retractable metal kinds," Hansen said. The inventory was pathetic, barely enough to get them through a handful of encounters. Foster nodded slowly, processing the information. Well, it's better than nothing, I guess, Foster said. Hanson's eyebrow raised slightly, his tone skeptical. You got a plan yet? Hanson asked. Foster leaned back in the chair, the springs creaking under his weight. He looked at the monitors again, then back to Hanson. In normal times, no, absolutely not. With what passes for a plan these days? I got a humdinger, Foster said. Hanson let out a horror laugh as he shook his head, backing away from the monitor as Foster got up. The sound was hollow, the kind of laugh that came when there was nothing else left to do. The two men walked out of the room, heading downstairs to where Private Parker and Private Thomas were sitting, their feet propped up on desks. Well, I was going to ask how the diversion was going, but based on the look on your face, I'm guessing not well, Thomas said. Parker tilted his head slightly, studying Foster's expression with an analytical eye. Yeah, Thomas, but that look is more disappointed than defeated. So my guess is it didn't pull many zombies away from us, rather than it pulled more towards us, Parker said. Foster stared at both men for a long beat, prompting both of them to nod in agreement. They had read him correctly, understanding what the failed plan meant for all of them. Oh yeah, there it is. I think you nailed it, Parker, Thomas said. Parker grinned, sitting up straighter in his chair. Damn it, I knew I should have made a bet, Parker said. Thomas looked at him sideways, his expression flat. You don't have anything I want, Thomas said. Parker gestured at himself, putting on a bit of a posed smile. Oh, come on, you know you're jealous of these looks, Parker said. Thomas stared at him for a long beat, his face expressionless. The silence stretched out, neither man breaking eye contact. Finally, Parker couldn't contain it any longer, breaking into laughter which spread to the other men. The sound filled the office space, loud and genuine, cutting through the darkness of their situation. All right, let's settle down and get locked in, Hanson said. The two privates nodded and got up from their comfortable positions, their boots hitting the floor with heavy thuds. Each man grabbed a sidearm off the table and holstered it along with the extra ammunition. The weapons looked small, inadequate for what they were about to face. They grabbed the retractable batons, tossing them over to the others. Foster caught his, the metal cold in his hand. He tested the extension mechanism, the baton snapping out with a sharp metallic sound. It would work for close quarters, assuming they could get close enough without being overwhelmed. So, how are we doing this, Cap? Thomas asked. Foster looked at each man in turn, measuring them. They were good soldiers, experienced enough to know what they were walking into. We need to get to the armory, but we also need to get a look at the plane. I'm thinking we divide and conquer, Foster said. The other three men looked around, as if they were having a silent conversation about the plan before they all nodded in agreement. Splitting up was risky, but staying together meant they could only accomplish one objective. They didn't have the luxury of time. Sounds like it's a little more dangerous given the numbers out there, Parker said. But a little safer since if the armory team gets stuck, there will be someone out there to help get them unstuck, Hanson said. Foster pointed at Thomas, making the assignments clear. Exactly. Thomas, you're with me, and we're headed to the armory to do a little shopping, Foster said. Thomas stood up straighter, accepting the assignment. His hand moved to his sidearm, checking that it was secured properly. Do we know how we're getting through the door? Thomas asked. Foster reached into his pocket, pulling out a key card and a piece of paper with some numbers scribbled on it. The key card was white plastic, worn from use, with a magnetic strip on the back. I borrowed the general's card and access code. I don't think he would mind, Foster said. Which means you're with me, Parker. We're going to check the plane, but also make sure that hangar is still locked up tight. We already have a shit show on our hands and don't need a bigger one, Hanson said. Parker nodded, then paused as a thought occurred to him. We might want to check the open hangar too, Parker said. Thomas looked confused, his brow furrowing. Why? They're already out, Thomas said. Parker's expression became more serious, his voice dropping. Some of them might not have made it out, Parker said. The soldiers nodded in agreement as they started moving over towards the front door, which still had zombies banging against it. The impacts were sporadic now, less frantic than they had been earlier. The creatures outside had mostly given up trying to force their way in, but a few persistent ones remained. Foster gestured for Hanson to take a look. Hanson, see if you can get a look at what we're dealing with out there, Foster said. Hansen stepped over to the window, peering out through the makeshift barricade of office furniture that had been stacked against it. Desks, chairs, filing cabinets, all piled up to create a defensive wall. He pressed his face close to the gap, his eyes scanning the area outside. He could see a handful of creatures still by the door, but most of the ones that had been out there had wandered off. Their attention spans were limited, easily distracted by new sounds or movements. 6, maybe 8, but pretty clear in either direction, Hansen said. Foster moved closer to the door, his hand on the baton. The metal felt solid in his grip. "We can manage that. Thomas, Parker, slide that desk out a few feet, just enough for them to have a single file opening to get through," Foster said. The two privates nodded and did as instructed, lifting one side of the desk and pulling it away from the door. The furniture scraped across the floor, the sound loud in the confined space. As they stopped, Foster drew his knife before opening the door. The blade was military issue, simple but effective. He positioned himself to the side, ready for what was coming. The door handle turned easily under his grip. Instantly it crashed open, smacking against the desk, which held firm. One creature shambled in, struggling to squeeze through the narrow gap. Its shoulders wedged against the sides of the opening, arms reaching forward. The zombie's face was slack, its eyes vacant and dead. As soon as it was through, Foster delivered a killing blow to the top of its head, dropping it. The knife punched through the skull with a wet crunch, the resistance minimal. The creature collapsed, its legs giving out. Brain matter leaked from the wound, dark and thick. As soon as it was on the ground, Parker reached down and grabbed its arms, pulling it out of the entryway, clearing the way for the next ghoul to shamble inside. The body was heavy, dead weight dragging across the floor. Like its predecessor, the next zombie met a grisly end. Foster's arm worked mechanically, stabbing down each time a creature made it through. The process repeated several times before the entryway was clear, bodies piling up just outside the door. Blood pooled on the floor, slick and dark. The four men stepped out into the open, the dim moonlight mixing with the lights on the buildings to provide a semi-illuminated space. The air was cool, carrying the smell of decay and smoke. In the distance, they could hear moaning, the sound of more creatures wandering through the base. "All right, let's get this done. Call me when you get to the plane," Foster said. Hansen nodded, and everybody exchanged fist bumps before the two teams turned in their opposite directions. The gesture was quick, a moment of solidarity before they split up. Foster watched Hansen and Parker disappear into the shadows, then turned to Thomas. "Let's get this done." Chapter 2. Foster and Thomas walked down the dimly lit path between the buildings, their footsteps echoing softly against the concrete. The structures on either side cast long shadows across their path, the moonlight struggling to penetrate the narrow space. A handful of zombies shambled out as they went, emerging from doorways and around corners like unwelcome surprises. The stragglers in groups of 2 and 3 were easy enough for them to deal with, the soldiers adjusting course to crack skulls with their blades before continuing on their way. Foster moved with efficiency, his knife finding targets with quick thrusts. Thomas followed his lead, dispatching creatures without breaking stride. The bodies dropped behind them, marking their path through the base. As they got a few hundred yards up, the noise they had made dispatching the other creatures was loud enough to draw the attention of a larger pack. The moaning started low, then built in volume as more voices joined in. Foster noticed the front edge of a group shambling about in the street ahead, their silhouettes visible in the pale light. He counted at least 20, maybe more behind them, too many to fight head-on with just knives and batons. "Cover! Cover!" Foster said. He kept his voice low as he motioned for Thomas to get to the side of the next building. Both men stayed low, running hard to the side of the next structure, relieved when they didn't see any zombies in the alley. Foster pressed his back against the wall, his breathing controlled despite the exertion. Thomas took position across from him, his hand on his sidearm. They waited, listening to the shuffling footsteps of the horde moving through the street. Foster peeked out from behind cover, watching as the mob shambled across the street, still looking for the source of the noise that had gotten their attention earlier. They moved in a loose cluster, bumping into each other, their arms outstretched. Some of them still wore military uniforms, the fabric torn and stained with blood. Others were in civilian clothes, residents from the base housing. The captain pulled back, thinking through their options. They could wait for the horde to pass, but that could take time they didn't have, or they could create another distraction, pull them away from their path to the armory. He looked at Thomas, then at the street ahead. The armory was close, just across the road, but getting there meant crossing open ground with a horde of zombies nearby. "Give me that sidearm," Foster said. Thomas nodded and did as instructed, pulling the weapon from his holster and passing it over. The captain checked it, confirming the magazine was full and a round was chambered. He thumbed the safety off, the small click barely audible. "Get to the other side of the building and tell me if we're clear up to the road. The armory is just on the other side of it, and it's going to take a minute to get in," Foster said. Thomas nodded and ran to the other side, his boots hitting the pavement in quick, measured steps. He peeked out from behind cover, pressing himself against the corner of the building. He stared at the scene for a few moments, scanning the area between their position and the road. A few scattered zombies wandered in the distance, but nothing they couldn't handle. He turned and gave Foster a thumbs up. The captain nodded, motioning for him to stay there, as he turned and walked back out into the open, in full view of the horde up near the street. His heart rate remained steady, his training taking over. Foster raised the handgun towards them, squeezing the trigger 3 times in a steady rhythm. The shots cracked through the air, echoing between the buildings. Muzzle flash lit up his face for brief moments, the recoil barely moving his arm. He was too far away for the shots to be accurate, but that wasn't his concern. He simply wanted their attention. And the ploy worked. Every creature in the horde turned and locked onto the captain, shambling in his direction, excitedly moaning as they went. The sound grew louder, more urgent, as they spotted him standing in the open. Foster stayed in the light for a good 30 seconds, wanting to make sure they were coming towards him. He could see their faces now, slack and dead, their mouths hanging open. Once they cleared the road by several yards, he darted back between the buildings, vanishing from their sight. The captain pumped his legs hard, getting to the other side, motioning for Thomas to start moving. The private pushed off the wall, running alongside Foster as they moved through the alley. Behind them, the excited moaning of the horde grew louder as the creatures tried to follow. A few moments later, both men emerged into the open area at the rear of the building, making the turn towards the street, and the armory awaiting them on the other side. The moonlight was brighter here, no buildings to block it. They could see the armory clearly now, a single-story structure with reinforced doors. They ran hard, hearing the excited moans of the horde on the other side of the buildings. The creatures were still chasing the memory of Foster's position. Shambling through the space where he had been standing, Thomas glanced down the alley between them as they ran, catching glimpses of the creatures as they moved. Much to his relief, they didn't notice them. The 2 soldiers pushed themselves, covering ground quickly. Foster's lungs burned slightly, but he kept his pace steady. They couldn't afford to slow down, not with a horde that close. Foster brought them to a stop at the last building before the road, wanting to make sure that the coast was clear before getting out into the open. He pressed himself against the corner, looking both directions. He spotted a smattering of ghouls who were wandering around in search of the source of gunshots they had heard earlier. They moved without purpose, shambling in random directions. Some stood in place, swaying slightly, while others walked in slow circles. None of them seemed aware of Foster and Thomas watching from the shadows. The captain then turned his attention to the armory, which was 50 yards away. The building sat isolated, surrounded by open pavement. He could see a few creatures wandering around outside of it, but wasn't too concerned. 3 zombies, spread out enough that they wouldn't be a problem. "I'll take care of the door. You clear the yard and watch my 6, Foster said. Thomas nodded as the 2 men prepared to make their move. Foster adjusted his grip on the key card in his pocket, making sure he could access it quickly. Thomas pulled his knife, holding it ready. Foster led them out, both men running hard, their boots pounding off the pavement as they went. The sound attracted the attention of the trio of ghouls by the armory, who began shambling towards them. Their moans cut through the air, but the soldiers were already committed. There was more than enough space between them for Foster to pass them with ease, leaving the dirty work to Thomas, who happily obliged. The private rushed up to the first creature, slamming his blade into its forehead as he ran by, barely breaking stride. The skull cracked under the impact, the zombie dropping without a sound. The The second creature reached for Thomas as he passed, but he dodged to the side, letting it grasp at empty air. He spun as he moved, his blade catching it in the temple. The zombie collapsed, its legs buckling. Foster lowered his shoulder as he passed the last one, making contact with the ghoul, sending it to the ground. The creature hit the pavement hard, its arms flailing. The captain didn't stop to finish it, trusting Thomas to handle the cleanup. He got up to the door, reaching into his pocket and pulling out the key card. His fingers fumbled slightly with the plastic, adrenaline making his movements less precise than he wanted. The keypad beeped as he swiped it on the sensor, a small red light blinking, the captain's eyes straining to read the numbers he had written down on the paper. The moonlight wasn't enough, the digits barely visible on the crumpled note. "Come on, really?" Foster said. He adjusted the paper so that it was more in the light, angling it to catch the glow from the keypad. The numbers came into focus, clear enough to read. In a flash, he punched in the code, his fingers hitting the buttons with quick taps. The door released with a satisfying beep, the light turning green. The lock mechanism clicked, the sound loud in the quiet air. Foster pushed the door open, turning back to call out to Thomas to let him know they were in. Before he could call out, however, the sounds of moaning came from inside. Close. Too close. "Jesus Christ," Foster said. He turned to see a set of arms reaching out for him, managing to grab onto his left arm. The creature had been standing just inside the doorway, waiting in the darkness. Its fingers dug into his sleeve, pulling with surprising strength. The captain instinctively pulled back, the creature tugging on his arm just enough to send him off balance. His feet slipped on the smooth concrete, his weight shifting backwards. The captain hit the ground hard, the sudden lurching managing to break free of the creature's grasp. The shotgun slung on his back cracking into his spine, causing pain to shoot through his body. He grunted, his vision blurring for a moment from the impact. The ghoul leaned down to feast on his newfound treat, but before it could, Foster managed to pull the sidearm free and deliver a killing shot. The crack of the gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space, the back of its brain splattering on the door, dark matter sliding down the metal surface. Foster kept aiming through the entryway for several seconds, making sure that was the only one. His ears rang from the gunshot, but he strained to listen for any other movement inside. Nothing stirred in the darkness beyond the door. He flinched as Thomas rushed over to him, reaching down to grab him. The private's face appeared above him, concerned. "It's me, Cap," Thomas said. Foster nodded as he was helped to his feet, accepting the hand up. His back ached where the shotgun had dug into his spine, but nothing felt broken. The two men looked back towards the horde they had distracted, watching as they shambled back in their direction. The creatures had heard the gunshot, their attention shifting to this new source of noise. They were still several buildings away, but they were coming, their moans growing louder. "If we go in, we're going to be trapped," Thomas said. Foster hesitated for a few seconds before making a call. They could run, try to make it back to the command center before the horde caught up. But they needed weapons, needed ammunition. This might be their only chance. 30-second sweep. If we see something, we stay. If there's nothing here, we run, Foster said. Thomas nodded and the two men rushed inside, the private slamming the door shut behind him. The metal door clanged into place, muffling the sounds of the approaching horde. They moved to the sidewall, hitting the lights, which quickly illuminated the space, which was mostly empty. The fluorescent lights flickered on, one by one, revealing the interior of the armory. The racks were bare, stripped clean of a majority of the gear that had been on there. Guns, ammunition, explosives, nearly all of it was gone. Empty hooks lined the walls where rifles should have been hanging. Ammunition crates sat empty, their lids removed and contents taken. Foster felt his stomach drop. They had risked everything to get here, and it looked like they were too late. "I don't like the look of this, Cap," Thomas said. Foster heard the private's comments and was beginning to lean in that direction as well. His eyes scanned the empty racks, the bare shelves. However, he stopped and got a smile on his face as he got to the back of the building. There, against the rear wall, sat something they had missed in their initial sweep. Crates still sealed, equipment bags, full and waiting. "Cap, we have to go," Thomas called out. The banging on the door had started, the zombies outside trying to force their way in. The metal shuddered with each impact, but held firm. "We're not going anywhere, Thomas," Foster said. The private was cautiously optimistic, given the captain's tone. He walked over to where Foster was, immediately seeing what the captain was seeing. His eyes went wide, a grin spreading across his face. "Oh yeah, we're definitely not going anywhere." Chapter 3. Hansen and Parker moved up the row of buildings, heading in the direction of the hangars and cargo plane. Their boots made soft sounds against the pavement, each step measured and deliberate. They moved in silence, checking around each corner for zombies. Hansen led the way, his hand signals crisp and clear. Parker followed 3 steps behind, keeping his eyes on their flanks. The system was automatic, born from years of training and recent days of survival. As they reached the next intersection, they could see a dozen in each direction, the closest ghoul 20 yards from them. The creatures shambled in their aimless patterns. Some clustered together, while others wandered alone. Their moans filled the air, a constant drone that had become background noise. The 2 soldiers looked at each other, using hand signals with each other. Hansen dished out the plan: walk right across the opening as quietly as possible. He pointed at the intersection, then made a walking motion with his fingers. Parker wasn't thrilled, his expression showing his doubts, but nodded in agreement. The sergeant led them out, Parker keeping pace with Hansen as they moved, doing everything they could to minimize the sounds of their footfalls. Each step was placed carefully, avoiding loose debris or anything that might make noise. Their breathing stayed controlled, shallow, and quiet. As they got halfway across, they heard the rapid gunshots going off behind them. 3 shots in quick succession, the sound echoing between the buildings, Foster's distraction. Both men picked up the pace as the zombies around them perked up. Heads turned, bodies shifted. The creature's attention locked onto the source of the noise, their moans becoming more excited. A couple of the ghouls noticed the 2 soldiers moving, their vacant eyes tracking the movement, but most of them started shambling off in the direction of the gunshots, drawn by the promise of prey. Hansen and Parker made it up another 50 yards in silence, glancing back at the zombies they had just passed by, relieved that they were going in the opposite direction. The horde shambled away, their numbers thinning as they pursued the sound. Only 4 zombies were still in pursuit of them, which was easy enough for them to deal with. Hansen motioned for Parker to follow as they cut down in front of the next building, getting out of sight of the ghouls. They moved quickly but quietly, their shadows stretching long across the pavement. They kept moving, turning back to the airfield at the next turn. "I think we lost them," Parker said. Hansen nodded as he kept his focus straight ahead, spotting the cargo plane on the runway. The massive aircraft sat in the middle of the tarmac, its rear loading ramp still down. Even from this distance, they could see the dark stains on the metal surface. To the right was Hangar 8, which still had a door open. Light spilled out from the interior, emergency lights still functioning on backup power. To the left of the plane was the other infested hangar, which thankfully was still sealed up. The doors were closed tight, no gap visible from this angle, but they could hear the faint sounds of moaning coming from inside, muffled by the metal walls. There was a smattering of ghouls around Hangar 8, only 3 of which were still on their feet. The others were on the ground, crawling or twitching. Even from a few hundred yards away, they could see the bodies on the ground, some of them twitching, but unable to stand. Missing limbs, torn flesh, bodies too damaged to function properly. "Come on, we're going to make sure that hangar is secured," Hansen said. Parker looked at the open door, then back at the sergeant. His hand moved to his knife, checking that it was secure in its sheath. "I'm following your lead, Sarge," Parker said. Hansen nodded as the 2 men picked up the pace, going into a light jog as their minds began to race at what might be awaiting them on the other side of the hangar doors. The distance closed quickly, the hangar growing larger as they approached. As they got closer, they softened their walk, readying their knives as they stalked their prey. The 3 standing zombies were spread out around the entrance, their movements random and uncoordinated. One stood facing away from them, staring at nothing. Another swayed in place, its arms hanging limp at its sides. The third paced back and forth in a small area, trapped in some kind of loop. Hansen walked to the left, Parker to the right, drawing the still-standing ghouls in different directions, thinning their ranks and making it easier for them to take down. The zombies noticed them, their heads turning at the movement. Moans escaped their throats, but they were slow to react. One by one, they drove their knives into the skulls, virtually no threat to the soldiers who had taken out 1,000 other creatures. In a similar manner, Hansen's blade punched through the temple of the first zombie, the creature dropping without resistance. Parker caught the second one from behind, his knife driving down through the top of its skull. The third zombie turned toward Hansen, reaching out with grasping hands. The sergeant sidestepped, letting the creature's momentum carry it past him. As it stumbled by, he drove his knife into the base of its skull, severing the brainstem. The zombie collapsed in a heap. Once the threatening zombies were down for the count, Hansen motioned for Parker to move up to the door. They approached from opposite sides, staying as quietly as possible. The hangar entrance loomed before them, the darkness inside absolute beyond the reach of the emergency lights. Each man tensed up as they could hear moaning coming from inside the hangar, multiple voices, overlapping and constant. The sound echoed off the metal walls, making it impossible to tell how many were inside. Hansen got to the edge of the door, which opened inwards, carefully poking his head around the corner. His eyes adjusted to the dimness, shapes becoming visible in the shadows. He ducked back behind cover as soon as he spotted a zombie, which was 5 yards away, and didn't notice him. The creature stood in profile, its head moving slowly from side to side. Blood covered its uniform, the fabric torn and shredded. Its jaw hung slack, broken on one side. Hansen let out a set of hand signals, letting Parker know what he saw. One zombie close, more deeper inside. Parker nodded and leaned in, getting a better view of the hangar as a whole. He immediately spotted the closed zombie, watching carefully as it turned its back towards him. The creature shambled a few steps away from the door, moving deeper into the hangar. Beyond it, Parker could see more shapes moving in the darkness. Dozens of them, maybe more. The entire hangar was filled with the dead. Without warning, Parker stepped into the doorway, grabbing onto the knob and yanking the door shut. The metal door swung on its hinges, closing with a heavy clang. The sound was loud, final. As it slammed, the angry chorus of moans picked up inside the hangar, as if the creatures knew that their meal was permanently out of reach. Bodies thumped against the door from the inside, hands pounding against the metal. The door shuddered but held firm, the lock mechanism clicking into place. "That was good work, Parker, but risky as hell," Hansen said. The private stepped back from the door, his heart racing from the close call. He kept his eyes on the metal surface, watching it shake with each impact. "I saw an opportunity and went for it, Sarge. That thing turned its back to me, and I didn't know if we'd have another chance." "I mean, did you see how many of them were in there?" Parker asked. Hansen nodded, understanding the reasoning even if he didn't like the risk. His own look inside had been brief, but the glimpses were enough. "I didn't get a good look, but based on the noise they're making, I'm guessing it's more than we wanted to deal with," Hansen said. The pounding continued, the zombies inside driven by instinct to reach the living they had sensed outside. Parker glanced at the door one more time, then back at Hansen. "Damn straight," Parker said. "Come on, let's go check out the plane," Hansen said. Parker nodded as the two men moved up along the hangars, making sure not to get too close to the still-moving creatures on the ground. The bodies writhed on the pavement, arms reaching out weakly. They looked down at them with pity, seeing that they were missing so much flesh that they couldn't function. One zombie was missing both legs, its torso dragging itself forward with its arms. Another had most of its abdomen torn away, organs trailing behind it. They were horrific sights, creatures that should have been put down, but somehow still clung to their cursed existence. It took a minute for them to reach the plane, both men sweeping the area as they approached. The tarmac was empty except for scattered debris and abandoned equipment. A fuel truck sat nearby, its hose still connected to nothing. The back of the cargo plane was still down. The blood splattered on the boxes of goods, revealing that the crew had been caught off guard by the zombies. The duo swept the plane, finding no zombies inside. The cargo hold was spacious, filled with crates and pallets. Emergency lights cast everything in a red glow, making the bloodstains look black. "I'm clear," Parker called out. He stood at the far end of the hold, his knife still drawn. His eyes scanned the shadows, looking for any movement. "Same here," Hansen said. The two soldiers immediately began checking the boxes of goods on the plane, both men muttering curses as they inspected them, not finding anything of particular value. "Do you have anything? Because all I have are clothes and bedding," Hansen said. Parker moved to another section of the hold, pulling open boxes and checking their contents. His expression grew more disappointed with each one. "I got some MREs," Parker said. He pulled out his flashlight, shining it on the packaging before letting out a groan and tossing it to the ground. The brown package hit the metal floor with a dull thud. "What's wrong?" Hansen asked. Parker held up another package, the words visible in the flashlight beam. His face showed his disgust. "It's the vegetable omelet one," Parker said. Hansen let out a bit of a defeated laugh as he spoke. Every soldier knew about that particular MRE, infamous throughout the military. "Hot vomit in a pouch, what's not to love?" Hansen said. Parker looked over some of the other packages, letting out groans as he saw they were mostly the same thing. Box after box of the same unwanted meal, like someone had ordered a bulk shipment of the worst option possible. "Well, if we run across a vegetarian, at least they'll be happy," Parker said. Hansen shook his head, closing the crate he had been examining. The entire plane was a bust, nothing useful for their immediate needs. "More likely that they won't be a vegetarian for very long," Hansen said. Both men let out a chuckle as they stepped out of the plane, looking over to the nearby hangar that housed the undead members of the military. They could see that it was locked up tight from their position, but they could hear the moans of the damned coming from within. The sound was constant, hundreds of voices all blending together. The hangar was packed with them, a writhing mass of dead flesh trapped behind metal doors. "That's going to be a bitch to bring down," Hansen said. "We could always weld the doors shut and use them for target practice," Parker suggested. Hansen considered it, then shook his head. "Too much effort for minimal gain." "I'd rather just blow the building up and be done with it," Hansen said. Parker nodded in agreement as Hansen pulled out the radio, clicking it on. The device crackled to life, static hissing before clearing. "Hey Cap, do you copy?" Hansen asked. The response came back almost instantly, Foster's voice clear through the speaker. "I got you loud and clear, Hansen. What's your status?" Foster asked. Hansen glanced back at the sealed hangar, confirming what they had accomplished. "Hangar doors are sealed up tight," Hansen said. There was a pause before Foster responded. "And the plane?" Foster asked. Hansen looked at Parker, who made a gagging gesture. The sergeant couldn't help but smirk. "Mostly clothes and bedding, but Parker found some vomit pouches," Hansen said. Foster's response came with understanding in his tone. Everyone knew what that meant. "Vegetable omelet, huh?" Foster asked. Hansen keyed the radio again, his voice carrying amusement. "Yep. If we run out of bullets, we can try feeding that to the zombies. It might be enough to take them down," Hansen said. A slight laughter came through the radio. "So, how did you boys make out at the armory?" Hansen asked. The captain's response made Hansen stand up straighter, hope sparking in his chest. "It wasn't a perfect score, but I think you'll like what we found. But we're going to need transport. Run across anything?" Foster asked. Hansen looked around the area, spotting the general's abandoned golf cart sitting against a nearby hangar. "I got a big-ass golf cart, will that work?" Hansen asked. Foster's response was immediate, pleased. "That'll work. Get it running and get over to the armory. Let me know when you're close, and make sure you get some good seats for the show," Foster said. Hansen had a confused look on his face, shaking it off as he responded. Whatever Foster had planned, it was bound to be interesting. "I'm almost afraid to ask. We'll be there in a few," Hansen said. The radio crackled one last time with Foster's response. "Copy that, Sarge," Foster said. The line went dead as Hansen turned back to the private. Parker was already looking toward the golf cart, ready to move. "The captain hit pay dirt. He wants us over at the armory. Let's move." Chapter 4. Hansen and Parker drove the golf cart across the runway, headed towards the armory that was roughly half a mile away from their current position. The engine on the vehicle hummed as they went, the electric motor not creating much noise. The tires made soft sounds against the concrete, rubber on pavement barely audible over the distant moaning. The runway stretched out before them, wide and empty. Landing lights lined the edges, their glass housings cracked and dark. The painted lines on the surface were faded, worn by years of heavy aircraft landing and taking off. Now the only traffic was the dead. Even so, they could see numerous zombies wandering around the runway, the ghouls having gotten distracted by something over the last few days. They moved without purpose, shambling in random directions. None of them were within 50 yards of them, however, posing no threat. "It sounds like the captain found something," Parker said. "One can only hope, because there wasn't squat on the plane," Hansen said. The two men continued driving in silence, their anticipation building as they got closer to the armory. The building grew larger as they approached, its reinforced structure visible against the darker buildings behind it. As they got within a few hundred yards, however, the situation out front came into view. Hansen let off the gas, the golf cart rolling to a stop as the two soldiers stared ahead in disbelief. There were nearly 100 zombies pressed up against the front of the armory, all of them clamoring to get inside. The mass of bodies pushed against the walls and door, hands clawing at metal and concrete. The moaning was deafening even at this distance, a chorus of hungry dead. "Jesus Christ, how the hell are we supposed to deal with that?" Parker asked. His voice carried shock, the plan they had been forming crumbling at the sight. That many zombies couldn't be taken quietly, couldn't be dealt with using knives and batons. They would need something bigger, something they didn't have. Hansen shook his head as he pulled out the radio, clicking it on. The device crackled for a moment before clearing. "Hey Cap, I'm not sure if you're aware, but you have a whole mess of those things right outside," Hansen said. Foster's response came back calm, almost amused, like he already knew exactly what Hansen was seeing. "Believe me, Hansen, we're well aware of the situation," Foster said. Hansen looked at Parker, both men confused by the captain's tone. He didn't sound concerned, didn't sound like a man trapped in a building with 100 zombies trying to break in. "Well, don't worry, just hang tight. Parker and I can figure out something to get them away," Hansen said. He was already thinking through options, ways to create a distraction. Maybe drive closer, draw some of them off, break the horde into smaller groups that could be managed. But Foster's response stopped that line of thinking cold. "It's not necessary, Sarge," Foster said. Hansen and Parker exchanged a confused look before the sergeant continued. "What are you talking about, Cap? There's got to be 100 of those things out front," Hansen said. There was a pause on the other end, then Foster's voice came back with a question. "Are you and Parker at a safe distance?" Foster asked. The question made Hansen's confusion deepen. Safe distance from what? The zombies were all focused on the armory, not on them. "Relatively speaking, we're a few hundred yards away," Hansen said. Foster's next words made no sense, but the tone was serious enough that Hansen didn't question it. "You might want to get behind some cover," Foster said. Hansen and Parker again exchanged a confused look, the sergeant shrugging and pulling the golf cart over to the side of a building. He maneuvered the vehicle carefully, backing it into position. He pulled it out just far enough so that they could see the armory, but with the bulk of the structure between them and whatever was about to happen. "All right, Cap, we're in position. So whatever magic trick you got up your sleeve, it's time to pull it," Hansen said. There wasn't a response from the captain as the line went dead. The radio hissed static for a moment, then went silent. The two soldiers sat in silence for a long beat before Parker spoke. "Sarge, I know we all deal with stress differently. Do you think the Cap is—" Parker said. Before Parker could finish his thought, both men flinched as a massive booming sound came from the armory. The noise was overwhelming, a continuous roar that echoed off every building on the base. They looked over, seeing the zombies at the front of the pack being shredded by a torrent of bullets. The rounds cut right through bodies, literally ripping them in two as the occasional tracer round lit up the night as it pierced through the crowd. Red streaks of light carved through the darkness, each one marking the path of destruction. Bodies exploded under the impact, chunks of flesh and bone flying in every direction. The fire was sustained for nearly 30 seconds, moving from side to side, ripping through the front of the building and zombies alike. Zombies fell in waves, the front ranks collapsing as the rounds tore through them. The bodies behind them jerked and spasmed as bullets passed through multiple targets. As the mob outside was reduced to a pile of body parts on the ground, the machine gun fire ceased. The sudden silence was jarring, ears still expecting the thunder of the weapon. Even from distance, the ears of the soldiers rang from the noise. Their amazed expression quickly faded once they realized that every zombie on base would be shambling in their direction. The gunfire had been a dinner bell, announcing the presence of prey to every creature within earshot. And on a quiet base like this, that meant all of them. "I don't know exactly what you were about to ask, Parker, But no, I don't think the Cap is having a bad reaction to the stress, Hansen said. Parker let out a chuckle as Hansen hit the gas, the golf cart picking up speed as they raced towards the armory. The vehicle bounced slightly over uneven pavement, the suspension creaking. As they got close, they could see Foster and Thomas walking out the front door, carrying a .50 cal machine gun and a giant canvas bag filled with ammo. The weapon was massive, easily weighing over 100 pounds. Foster had the gun itself, while Thomas carried the ammunition bag, the canvas bulging with linked rounds. Both men moved carefully, their steps deliberate. The two men stepped carefully over the bodies of the zombies on the ground, making sure that they weren't grabbed or bitten. The carnage was extensive, body parts scattered across the pavement, blood pooled everywhere, dark and thick. The bodies may have been decimated by the .50 cal rounds, but unless the heads were destroyed, they were still active. Arms reached out from the pile, fingers grasping at air. Jaws snapped open and closed, teeth clicking together. The creatures were still trying to attack, still driven by hunger, even as their bodies lay in pieces. The duo kept their eyes to the ground, Thomas kicking away one zombie's hand as it reached out for him. "These things are relentless," Thomas said. Foster nodded, stepping over a torso that was trying to drag itself forward, using one remaining arm. Its legs were gone, blown away by the machine gun fire. "We're going to have to double back and get on cleanup duty, but that can wait. As long as they don't have feet, they're not going anywhere," Foster said. Thomas nodded as they cleared the row of bodies, stepping over to the golf cart. Hansen and Parker engaged in some light clapping, playfully approving of their methods. "You weren't kidding when you said you found some goodies," Hansen said. Foster smiled, adjusting his grip on the heavy weapon. The barrel was still hot from sustained fire, heat radiating off the metal. "Oh, this old thing," Foster said. He let out a laugh as he extended the weapon to the sergeant, who looked at him in a confused manner. Hansen's hands moved to take it, but he hesitated. "Is this a gift?" Hansen asked. Foster's grin widened, understanding what he was asking. The implication was clear. "It is. That golf cart looks big enough for you to set it up on the back," Foster said. Hansen shook his head, processing what the captain was suggesting. It was insane, impractical, and exactly the kind of thing that might work. "You want to mount a .50 cal on the back of a golf cart?" Hansen asked. Foster shrugged, like it was the most natural thing in the world. His expression suggested he had already worked through the logistics in his head. "I would have preferred a pickup truck, but this should do," Foster said. "We're not all going to fit on there," Parker said. "We don't have to. I want you and Hansen to start making the rounds on base. Make some noise, honk the horn, whatever you have to do to get a horde of them following you. Once you got a crowd, mow them down," Foster said. "Any particular place you want us to drop them?" Hansen asked. Foster gestured in the direction of the residential area, the houses dark and empty on the edge of the base. "Get them over to the neighborhood. We're going to have to do a thorough sweep of the houses once we get this place locked down. So might as well get everybody in one place," Foster said. "We can work with that," Hansen said. Parker looked at Foster and Thomas, wondering what their role would be in all this. They couldn't all be playing zombie bait. "What are you and Thomas going to do?" Parker asked. Private Thomas cracked a smile as he slung another canvas bag around, unzipping it and showing Parker its contents. The bag opened to reveal blocks of C4, detonators, and wire enough explosives to bring down a building. "You boys love making noise tonight, don't you?" Parker asked. "They didn't leave much behind, but what they left was gold," Thomas said. As the soldiers got the machine guns situated on the golf cart, the sounds of moaning hit their ears. They looked back towards the runway, and a small crowd of zombies was beginning to form. Just a few dozen, but it was growing. More shapes emerged from between buildings, shambling toward the source of the gunfire. "You guys get a move on. See if you can't pull them away from the runway so Thomas and I can get up there to deal with the hangar," Foster said. Hansen secured the last strap holding the .50 cal in place, testing its stability. The weapon was mounted on the rear seat, facing backwards. Parker would have to fire it while they drove. "We'll take care of it, Cap," Hansen said. He exchanged a fist bump with Foster as he got back behind the wheel of the golf cart. Parker got situated in the passenger seat, keeping a firm grip on the .50 cal. Foster and Thomas watched as the other two picked up speed towards the growing mob, the sergeant honking the horn on the golf cart before cutting the wheel hard to the right. The sound was sharp and loud, immediately drawing attention. Within moments, they vanished behind a building, the mob of zombies following them at a slow pace. The creatures shambled after the golf cart, their arms outstretched. The moaning grew louder as more joined the chase, drawn by both the horn and the movement of their fellow zombies. "All right, Thomas, are you ready for a hike?" Foster asked. The private adjusted the bag of explosives on his shoulder, the weight settling comfortably. His expression was determined, ready for what came next. "As ready as I'm ever going to be," Thomas said. "That's the spirit. Come on, let's go blow ourselves up a hangar." Chapter 5. Hansen and Parker drove slowly through the row of buildings on the center of the base, a growing mob of ghouls trailing them at a comfortable distance. The electric motor hummed steadily, the sound low but constant. Behind them, the moaning of dozens of zombies created a backdrop of hunger and death. The buildings on either side were dark, windows broken or shuttered. Office spaces, storage facilities, administrative buildings, all of them empty now, their occupants either dead or evacuated. The street was wide enough for the golf cart to maneuver easily, but the zombies behind them filled it from sidewalk to sidewalk. Hansen pulled up to the next intersection, walkways that cut in all four directions through the complex. To the left and right were a few dozen zombies, spread out over 100 yards. Straight ahead were three creatures within 20 yards, and shambling towards them. The sergeant slowed the cart to a stop, letting the engine idle. He looked at the approaching zombies, then back at the horde following them. "Parker, if you wouldn't mind dealing with them, I want to give the stragglers a chance to get over here," Hansen said. Parker looked at the three zombies ahead, then at the ones on the side streets. He understood what Hansen wanted, a chance to gather more of them before moving on. "Do you want them snuffed out quietly?" Parker asked. Hansen turned to look at him, his eyebrow raised. "Snuffed out? What are you, a mob hitman?" Hansen asked. Parker shrugged, a grin forming on his face. The levity felt good after days of constant tension. "I've been killing zombies for a week now. I'm just trying to keep things fresh," Parker said. Hansen let out a chuckle, shaking his head as he got into the character of a mob boss. He leaned back in the driver's seat, his posture shifting to something more theatrical. "All right, you see, those three over there are ripping the family off, skimming off the top, putting a little cheddar in their pockets. Why don't you go teach them a lesson, one that will let their friends know we're not ones to be messed with," Hansen said. His voice took on an exaggerated accent, somewhere between Brooklyn and Boston. Parker let out a laugh as he pulled his sidearm, brandishing it with a smile as he walked over towards the three creatures that were getting closer. The private got within a few yards of them, staring them down as he aimed. The zombies moaned, their arms reaching forward. They wore the remnants of military uniforms, blood-stained and torn. One was missing most of its jaw, the bone exposed and broken. "You double-crossed the wrong family. The boss sends his regards," Parker said. He squeezed the trigger, executing the closest zombie like he was pulling a mob hit. The gunshot cracked through the air, the zombie's head snapping back as the round punched through its skull. It dropped without a sound, collapsing to the pavement. He then stepped over to the others, putting them down with precise headshots before turning back to Hansen. Two more shots, two more bodies hitting the ground. The brass casings clinked against the concrete, rolling to a stop. The sergeant hit the gas, driving up to him, motioning frantically for him to get in. His hands waved in exaggerated panic, playing up the act. "We've been made, the fuzz is on us. Get your ass in here," Hansen said. Parker holstered the weapon, rushing over to the golf cart and jumping in. His boots hit the floor of the cart as he grabbed hold of the frame. As soon as he had a hold of the .50 cal, Hansen floored it, picking up speed and rushing up to the next intersection. The cart accelerated as fast as its electric motor would allow, the wind picking up slightly. Once he saw that it was clear in both directions, he put it in park. The cart rolled to a stop, the brake engaging with a soft click. Both men looked back, knowing they needed to give the zombies time to catch up to them. The horde was still coming, shambling forward at their slow but relentless pace. More were joining from the side streets drawn by the gunshots. As they sat there, they broke into a fit of laughter at their antics. The laugh came from deep within them, the absurdity completely overwhelming them. The mob boss routine, the execution-style killings, the chase in a golf cart. It was ridiculous, insane, and somehow exactly what they needed. They carried on for a solid minute before calming down. Their breathing was labored from the laughter, sides aching, only for Parker to pick back up as he looked to the building on the left. His laughter renewed, harder than before. "Are you good, Parker?" Hansen asked. Parker laughed so hard that he wasn't able to speak coherently. He pointed over to the building, his hand shaking from the effort. The sergeant looking and seeing that it was the medical services building. A sign hung above the entrance, listing the various departments inside. Mental health services was third on the list. "It's probably a good thing the shrink isn't in today. They would most definitely be pulling us off duty," Parker said. Hansen let out another laugh, shaking his head at the absurdity of it all. It went on for a few more seconds before it died down, the humor fading as reality crept back in. The laughter stopped, replaced by the constant moaning of the approaching horde. Hansen wiped at his eyes, taking a breath to steady himself. "What do you say, Parker? Are you ready to head over to the neighborhood?" Hansen asked. Parker looked back at the mob, which had grown to a couple hundred. The sight of so many people, military and civilians alike, sobered the private up. He recognized some of them, or what was left of them. Neighbors from the base housing, fellow soldiers he had served with, families he had seen at barbecues and community events. With a solemn nod, he spoke. "Yeah, Sarge, let's get this over with," Parker said. Hansen could hear the seriousness in Parker's voice, staying quiet as he hit the gas. He kept the speed low as he moved, making sure that the zombie horde kept pace. The cart rolled forward slowly, just fast enough to stay ahead, but not so fast that they would lose their followers. Over the next 20 minutes, they attracted another 100 ghouls, all of them following along, as they slowly drove into the neighborhood on the far side of the base. The residential area was quieter than the rest of the base, the houses smaller and more spread out. As they went, they looked at the houses, some of them still having lights on, the people being forced out in the middle of the night. "Where do you want to do this at, Sarge?" Parker asked. Hansen scanned the streets ahead, looking for the right location. Somewhere contained, somewhere they could funnel the zombies into a kill zone. "There's a cul-de-sac on the next street over. I say we park there and let them have it," Hansen said. "That's a little risky, isn't it?" Parker asked. Hansen nodded, acknowledging the concern. But he had thought it through, had an exit strategy in mind. "There's a hiking trail that runs along the back of the houses, so if things get too bad, we can hike it," Hansen said. "All right, you line them up and I'll knock them down," Parker said. Hansen drove them up to the next street, making the turn towards the cul-de-sac, which was 2 blocks up. The street was narrow here, lined with small trees and streetlights. He kept the speed low as he went, making sure the horde made the turn. Once the ghouls were following, the sergeant sped up, putting a full block of distance between them. The cart accelerated, leaving the shambling mass behind. He slammed on brakes 20 yards from the house at the back, making sure that the golf cart was lined up in the middle of the road. The cart skidded slightly, tires squealing on the pavement. They were positioned perfectly, facing back the way they came, with a clear line of sight down the entire street. Private Parker double-checked the ammo feed to the 50 cal, making sure it was ready to go. The belt of linked ammunition fed smoothly into the weapon, no kinks or jams. He looked into the canvas bag, seeing that there were at least 1,000 rounds in there. "Try not to blow through all of it," Hansen said. Parker nodded, his hands gripping the weapon. The weight was substantial, the metal cold under his fingers. "Don't worry, Sarge. This isn't my first rodeo," Parker said. Hansen turned in his seat, looking at the private. His expression was serious, the humor from earlier completely gone. "I know it's not, and I know I'm stating the obvious, but with, well, everything, it doesn't hurt to state the obvious," Hansen said. Parker thought about it for a moment, nodding in agreement. The constant stress, fighting for their lives day after day. It was taking a toll, and he knew it. Mistakes happened when you were exhausted, when your mind wasn't sharp. "Sarge, while I deal with them, do me a favor and keep a watch on the houses around us," Parker said. Hansen thought about responding, since it was something he was going to do anyway, but let out a slight chuckle instead. "I got you covered, Parker," Hansen said. The private disengaged the safety on the machine gun, getting a firm grip on it as the zombies continued getting closer. The horde filled the street, hundreds of them packed together. Their moaning grew louder, more excited as they spotted their prey. Once the front edge of them was within 10 yards, he squeezed the trigger. The 50 cal kicked like a mule, forcing Parker to strain his muscles to keep it pointed in the direction he wanted. The muzzle flash lit up the darkness, illuminating the zombies in strobing bursts. He moved it horizontally across the line, the tracer rounds illuminating the massive damage he was causing as they flew through zombies. Bodies were ripped in half, falling to the ground in a blood-soaked heap. The rounds tore through multiple targets, the sheer power of the weapon devastating at close range, arms and legs separated from torsos. Heads exploded in sprays of gore. The recoil caused the gun to aim slightly upwards, which resulted in heads being completely eviscerated. Parker fought to control the weapon, his arms burning from the effort. The barrel glowed hot, heat waves distorting the air. Spent casings ejected in a continuous stream, clattering against the pavement. The street became a slaughterhouse, bodies piling up on top of each other. As quickly as the assault had begun, it ended, the machine gun falling silent. Smoke drifted from the barrel, the smell of gunpowder heavy in the air. The duo looked down the street, nearly an entire block filled with twitching corpses. Not a single creature was left standing, at least not from what they could see. "Do you want to check them?" Parker asked. His voice was hoarse, his ears ringing from the sustained fire. Hansen surveyed the carnage, the sheer number of bodies they would have to go through. "No, that's something that can wait until morning. We're going to have to make some spears or something to deal with them," Hansen said. Parker nodded as the two men sat there for a moment, trying not to think about the mass of bodies they had just taken out. The reality of what they had done settled over them, heavy and uncomfortable. These had been people once, neighbors and friends and fellow soldiers. As they sat there, they flinched as a large detonation happened on the other side of the base. The sound rolled across the base like thunder, deep and powerful. A giant fireball filled the air, lighting up the night sky. Orange and red flames climbed into the darkness, debris raining down in the distance. "The captain doesn't mess around, does he?" Parker asked. Hansen watched the flames, seeing the glow reflect off the buildings around them. Foster had done it, blown the hangar. "No, Parker, he does not," Hansen said. The two men sat there for another minute, just catching their breath before heading out in search of more zombies. The mission wasn't complete yet. There were still creatures out there that needed to be dealt with before they could get moving. However, the radio crackled to life. "Hansen, Parker, you need to get to the airstrip. We might be in trouble." Chapter 6. Foster and Thomas walked over towards Hangar 8, listening intently to the noise coming from within. Their boots made soft sounds against the concrete, each step measured and quiet. While they could hear a few moans, it didn't sound like much, and none were close to the door. "Get that sidearm ready," Foster said. Thomas pulled the weapon from his holster, checking the magazine one more time. His thumb moved to the safety, ready to flip it off if needed. "What are you going to do?" Thomas asked. Foster moved closer to the door, his hand reaching for the knob. His movements were careful, controlled. "I'm going to open this door and see what we're dealing with," Foster said. Thomas raised the sidearm, aiming at the doorway. His stance was solid, ready to fire if anything came through. "So, if any of them get too close," Thomas said. Foster nodded, his hand gripping the knob tightly. The metal was cold under his fingers. "Pop it in the head," Foster said. Thomas nodded as the captain got over to the door. He turned the knob, pushing it open gently. The hinges creaked slightly, the sound loud in the quiet air. He looked into the space, immediately honing in on the closest zombie, which was 15 yards away and unaware of his presence. The creature shambled in a small circle, its movements repetitive and mindless. It wore a mechanic's uniform, the fabric stained with oil and blood. Tools hung from a belt at its waist, forgotten and useless now. Foster studied the scene for a long beat, seeing dozens of ghouls wandering around the space. They moved between equipment and workstations, bumping into toolboxes and rolling carts. None of them seemed aware of the door being opened, too focused on their aimless wandering. He contemplated for a moment before pulling the door shut. The door closed with a soft click, the lock engaging. Foster stepped back, letting out a breath. "How's it looking in there?" Thomas asked. "It looks manageable," Foster said. Thomas lowered the sidearm slightly, his expression questioning. Manageable could mean a lot of things. "So what do you think? One block do the trick?" Thomas asked. "I think we'll be all right leaving them be. Once we get some more manpower, it shouldn't be a big deal to set up a barricade and just take them out the old-fashioned way," Foster said. Thomas nodded, seeing the logic. Save the C4 for where they really needed it. The creatures in Hangar 8 weren't going anywhere, trapped behind closed doors. "Might be a good opportunity for Carver to get his feet wet," Thomas said. Foster smiled at the suggestion. The young private had proven capable with a rifle, but he needed combat experience. Close quarters work with zombies would test him. "I'm all for letting you younger folks do the heavy lifting," Foster said. Thomas let out a laugh. "You're not that much older than me, Cap," Thomas said. Foster started walking, gesturing for Thomas to follow. His expression was playful, the banter welcome. "Yeah, but I got a lot more miles on my body," Foster said. They walked in silence, the sounds of moans getting louder as they went. Even through the walls it was audible, a constant drone of hungry dead. The noise grew as they approached, building from a low murmur to a deafening chorus. "So, how do you want to do this?" Thomas asked. "There should be a ladder around the side to get us up top," Foster said. It took the duo a few minutes of walking before they spotted their way up to the roof. The ladder was bolted to the side of the building, metal rungs leading up to the top. Foster and Thomas climbed up the ladder that was affixed to the side of the hangar that housed the scores of zombified service members. As they ascended, they could hear the deafening chorus of moans coming from within. The sound vibrated through the metal structure, making the ladder shake slightly under their hands. Each rung brought them higher, the ground falling away below. The wind picked up as they climbed, cooler up here than at ground level. Their boots found each step carefully, neither man wanting to slip. As they got close to the top, Foster peeked through a skylight that was right beside the ladder. The glass was dirty, covered in dust and grime, but he could see through it well enough. The entire floor was filled with ghouls, packed in tight, trying to move but unable to do so. They were pressed together like sardines, bodies crammed against each other. Arms reached up toward the skylights, hands grasping at nothing. The moaning was constant, overlapping voices creating a wall of sound. Some were in uniform, others in civilian clothes. All of them dead, all of them hungry. Foster kept climbing, getting to the top, as Thomas took a peek for himself. The private stopped at the skylight, looking down into the hangar. His face went pale, his jaw clenching. He shook his head dejectedly as he reached the top. Foster was already on the roof, checking the structure. The surface was relatively flat, covered in weatherproof material. Support beams were visible underneath, the skeletal framework that held everything up. "Are you good, Thomas?" Foster asked. Thomas pulled himself onto the roof, standing up slowly. His expression was troubled, haunted by what he had seen. "Yeah, I just can't imagine what those men and women went through. I know they were infected and going to die anyway, but they didn't go at the same time," Thomas said. He took a beat, envisioning the chaotic scene that undoubtedly took place. A few people die in turn, and then it's a chain reaction. No escape, just terror, Thomas said. Foster nodded, understanding the weight of it. He had thought about it too, imagined what those final hours must have been like. "Yeah, I know. I have no doubt that it ate the general up too. But there really wasn't another way, short of executing them," Foster said. Thomas looked at the skylight again, then back at Foster. His voice was quiet when he spoke. "All things considered, I think I would have preferred that," Thomas said. Foster stepped closer, his hand on Thomas's shoulder. The gesture was brief but sincere. "Well, Private, we can't undo what has been done, but we can put an end to their suffering," Foster said. He extended his hand, motioning for blocks of C4. Thomas nodded, pulling the canvas bag around. He opened it, the blocks of explosive packed neatly inside. He handed some of them over, keeping some for himself. "All right, let's set these at the support beams. 1 block per beam," Foster said. Thomas looked at the roof, counting the visible supports. There were at least a dozen major beams, maybe more. "Do you think that's going to be enough?" Thomas asked. "I have no idea, but I think it might. I'm hoping that if we can get enough of the roof to start collapsing that it will all just fall in on itself," Foster said. Thomas pulled out a roll of DT cord. The wire needed to connect everything to the detonator. He started measuring it out, planning the layout. "All right, "I'll take the right?" Thomas asked. Foster moved to the left side of the roof, his own blocks of C4 in hand. The surface was large, requiring them to spread out to cover everything. "And I got the left. Meet back here when you're done," Foster said. The two soldiers went about placing the C4 at the major support beams on the hangar. The structure was large, meant to house massive aircraft for storage and repairs, and while the roof wasn't particularly sturdy, they hoped it would be enough to crush the creatures below. Foster moved methodically, finding each beam and attaching the explosive. He pressed the blocks firmly against the metal, making sure they would stay in place. The det cord ran from one charge to the next, connecting them all in a circuit. Below him, the moaning continued, unaware of what was being prepared above. The zombies shambled in their confined space, pressed together by sheer numbers. It took them the better part of 20 minutes to get the explosive secured. As Foster walked back to the ladder, he saw Thomas standing there, looking over the space, not seeing a zombie on the airfield. "Are we good to go?" Foster asked. Thomas checked the detonator one more time, making sure all the connections were solid. The small device blinked green, indicating everything was ready. "Yep, every support beam is ready to blow," Thomas said. Foster looked back at the hangar one last time, thinking about the people trapped inside. This wasn't what they deserved, but it was all he could give them now. "Let's get down to the ground then," Foster said. The two soldiers descended quickly, walking back towards the cargo plane a few hundred yards away, putting some distance between them and the structure slated for detonation. Their boots hit the pavement in quick succession, eating up the distance. Thomas pulled out the detonator, powering it on before handing it over to Foster. The device beeped softly, the display showing ready status. "Are you ready?" Foster asked. Thomas looked back at the hangar, then at Foster. His expression was resolved, accepting what needed to happen. "Fire it up, Cap," Thomas said. The two men took cover behind some boxes inside the cargo plane before the captain hit the trigger. The entire plane rattled as the shockwave from the explosion reached it. The metal structure shook, boxes sliding slightly on the floor. Despite being hundreds of yards away and behind cover, they could still feel the heat coming off the explosion. The sound was enormous, a deep boom that rolled across the entire base. The ground trembled, debris launching into the air. Flames erupted from the hangar, orange and red against the dark sky. Both men popped their heads up from cover, looking back towards the explosion, watching as the roof collapsed onto the army of dead below. The structure folded in on itself, metal beams twisting and breaking. Dust and smoke billowed out, obscuring everything. Thomas let out a celebratory yell, pumping his fist at the result. The plan had worked, the hangar was coming down. Foster, however, remained vigilant, staring at the structure, silently attempting to will every creature inside a quick demise. His eyes tracked the collapse, watching how the building fell. Much to his dismay, the large sliding door that made up the front of the building didn't fall inwards. Rather, it fell outwards, landing on the airstrip. The massive door crashed down, hitting the pavement with a heavy clang. As it hit the ground, the flames from inside the hangar illuminated the situation. Most of the zombies had been crushed, however. As the roof portion fell, it missed a significant number of zombies. The creatures that had been near the front of the hangar, pressed against the door, had been shielded by the falling debris. Now they stumbled out into the open, freed from their prison. "What the hell?" Thomas asked. Thomas and Foster stared at the hangar, watching as 100 zombies flowed out from the structure. A few of them were on fire, flames consuming their clothes and flesh. But it didn't seem to slow them down, the creatures shambling forward despite being ablaze. "How is that possible?" Thomas asked. His voice carried disbelief, watching burning zombies walk like nothing was wrong. Foster's jaw tightened, watching the situation unfold. Maybe that portion of the roof was pulled inwards rather than dropping straight down. "It doesn't really matter, though, because they're out," Foster said. Thomas looked at the horde emerging from the destroyed hangar, then back at Foster. "So what do we do?" Thomas asked. Foster thought for a moment before reaching to his radio, clicking it on. "Hanson, Parker, you need to get to the airstrip. We might be in trouble," Foster said. The response came back quickly, Hanson's voice clear through the speaker. "Are you okay, Cap? We heard the explosion all the way across base," Hanson asked. Foster watched the zombies spreading out onto the airstrip, their numbers growing as more emerged from the wreckage. Yeah, we're okay, but there's 100 of those things from the hangar headed our way, Foster said. There was a pause on the other end, Hansen processing the information. Do you have a place to hide? Hansen asked. Foster looked around the cargo plane, considering their options. They could seal themselves in, wait it out. We're in the cargo plane right now, Foster said. Hansen paused for a moment, thinking. When he came back on, his voice carried a different plan. No, get out to the airstrip and start walking, Hansen said. Foster's eyebrow raised, confused by the instruction. That was the opposite of what he expected. Sergeant? Foster asked. Hansen's response was confident, certain. He had something in mind. Just trust me, Foster. Keep your distance from them, but make sure they stay on you. We'll be there in a few minutes, Hansen said. The line went dead as Thomas looked over to the captain. His expression showed doubt, questioning the plan. We're not going to do that, are we? Thomas asked. Foster looked at the radio, then at Thomas. Hansen had never steered him wrong before, and the sergeant had proven capable. I trust Hansen. Come on, let's get hiking. Chapter 7. Foster and Thomas walked down the airstrip, looking over their shoulders as they went at the horde of ghouls following them. The concrete stretched out before them, wide and empty except for the shambling mass behind. They kept a brisk pace, making sure to stay at least 50 yards ahead of them. The zombies moved in a loose cluster, their moaning constant and eager. Some were still on fire, flames consuming their bodies but not stopping their advance. Others limped on broken legs, dragging themselves forward. The mass moved as one entity, driven by the same hunger. As they went, both soldiers would let out yells, making sure that the creatures kept their focus on them. The shouts echoed across the empty airstrip, drawing attention and maintaining the chase. They didn't want to have any of them wander off, giving them more zombies to track down later. Between yells, the two men carried on a conversation, like they were just out for a leisurely stroll. The absurdity of it wasn't lost on either of them, discussing plans while being chased by 100 zombies. So Cap, once we get this place locked down, what are we doing next? Thomas asked. Foster glanced back at the horde, confirming they were maintaining distance. His breathing was steady despite the pace. My first instinct is to sleep for 12 hours, but somehow I don't think that's in the cards for me, Foster said. Both men chuckled before continuing. I'm serious, Cap. I know we're doing the party bus plan, so getting the helicopter pilot here is a priority, Thomas said. He trailed off, as if he had something else he wanted to say, but didn't. His expression showed he was working through an idea, trying to figure out how to articulate it. Don't hold back on me, Thomas. If you got an idea, put it out there, Foster said. Thomas took a breath, organizing his thoughts. The private looked at the base around them, the buildings and structures they were fighting to reclaim. I was just thinking about how once we get this place secure, it might be a good idea to start moving people here, Thomas said. Foster contemplated the idea for a moment, nodding along. That's good in theory, but don't you think that's going to go a lot smoother once we clear out the city? Foster asked. Thomas shook his head, having already considered that angle. He pointed back in the direction of the city. I'm not saying we get the whole city, Cap, just people in the northern part of town. Didn't we tell Connor to start doing that in the south? Thomas asked. Foster continued nodding, agreeing with the private. The plan was coming together in his head, seeing how it could work. It's not a bad idea, Thomas, Foster said. He looked at the command center in the distance, thinking about the resources they had available. The base had housing, supplies, defensible positions, everything a group of survivors would need. Once we get secure, I'll have Mike put out the word that we're looking for a few adventurous souls who want to go crack a few skulls and rescue a few people, Foster said. I know 3 people off the top of my head who would be game, Thomas said. Foster let out a laugh, immediately knowing who he was talking about. Can you imagine the looks on people's faces when they see a group of gladiators rolling up in a military transport to bring them to safety? Foster asked. Thomas laughed, remembering his own first encounter with the group. They were intimidating even when they were on your side. I know how I looked, and I'm used to seeing some shit, Thomas said. Both men continued laughing, interrupted when the radio sprung to life. The crackling sound cut through their conversation. Hey, Cap, we got you in sight. Look to your left, Hansen said. The 2 men looked to the left, spotting Hansen and Parker riding up in the golf cart. The vehicle bounced slightly over the uneven surface, moving fast. The private was already turned around, manning the machine gun. His hands gripped the weapon, ready to fire. The sergeant drove them right up next to the captain, stopping. The cart skidded slightly, tires squealing on the concrete. "Looks like you boys are popular," Hansen said. Foster gestured back at the horde following them, a smile on his face. The zombies were still coming, arms outstretched and moaning. "Just look at me, Hansen. Is it any wonder I can draw a crowd?" Foster asked. Both men let out a laugh as Hansen got the golf cart in the proper firing position. He spun the wheel, backing up and turning, so the rear of the cart faced the approaching horde. Everybody backed away, except for Parker, who got the weapon ready to go. The private's hands moved over the 50 cal, checking the ammunition feed one more time. "Fire in the hole," Parker said. He hit the trigger, the machine gun firing, sending a torrent of bullets downrange. The sound was deafening, the weapon roaring as it unleashed death. The soldiers watched as the trailing mob was ripped to shreds by the stream of hot lead. Bodies exploded under the impact, chunks of flesh and bone flying through the air. The zombies in front collapsed, those behind them falling as the same rounds tore through multiple targets. Tracer rounds lit up the darkness, red streaks cutting through the horde. The assault went on for a solid 30 seconds before the gun fell silent. Smoke drifted from the barrel, the smell of gunpowder heavy in the air. The men looked to where the mob had been, relieved to see that nothing was still standing. The airstrip was littered with bodies, a carpet of dead flesh stretching back along the runway. Some twitched, arms moving weakly, but none were capable of standing, of continuing the chase. "How's the ammo looking on that thing?" Foster asked. Parker checked the canvas bag, seeing how much of the belt was left. The linked rounds were diminished, but not depleted. "I still have a few hundred rounds," Parker said. "Let's save them for a rainy day," Foster said. Parker re-engaged the safety before getting out of the golf cart, stretching his legs and popping his back. His muscles ached from maintaining the firing position, tension releasing as he moved. Thomas surveyed the carnage they had created, the bodies scattered across the airstrip. The base was nearly clear now. "It looks like we put a hurting on them cap," Thomas said. Hansen climbed out of the driver's seat, looking around at the relatively empty base. The sounds of moaning had faded, replaced by an eerie quiet. "So what now?" Hansen asked. "Let's get back to the command center, check the cameras, and get an idea of where the stragglers are hiding at," Foster said. The men nodded and piled into the golf cart, Hansen hitting the gas and driving them back across base. As they drove, they kept their eyes peeled for zombies, rarely seeing them. The base looked different now, emptier, almost peaceful if you ignored the bodies and blood. "I got one on the right," Thomas said. He pointed to a lone zombie shambling between buildings, its movements slow and aimless. Hansen pulled up alongside the creature, slowing down enough for the private to jump out. Thomas didn't break stride, keeping pace with the golf cart as he moved over and delivered a head strike with his blade, dropping the ghoul. The knife punched through the skull cleanly, the zombie collapsing without a sound. With a smooth move, he jumped back into the cart, the soldiers making the rest of the drive to the command center. The building came into view, still barricaded and secure. The four men got inside, securing the door behind them. The furniture was pushed back into place, blocking the entrance. As soon as they were sealed inside, everybody collapsed into chairs, exhaustion beginning to take its toll. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by the bone-deep weariness that came after sustained combat. Foster looked at his men, who were quickly settling in as best they could. Parker's eyes were already drooping, his head nodding forward. "Hansen, see if you can find us something soft to sleep on," Foster said. The sergeant shook his head, forcing himself to stay alert. "We're good, Foster. There's work still to be done," Hansen said. Foster's expression became more serious, his tone leaving no room for argument. They had pushed hard enough. "It can wait. The sun is up in a few hours. We'll tackle it then," Foster said. Hansen started to protest, his sense of duty pushing him to continue, but Foster cut him off. "But Cap," Hansen said. Foster's voice carried command, the order clear and final. "That's an order, Sergeant," Foster said. Hansen nodded as he smacked the boots of the two privates, who had already put their feet up on the desks. They had made themselves comfortable, bodies relaxing into the chairs. "Come on, you heard the captain," Hansen said. The two privates groaned as they pulled themselves back up to their feet, their bodies angry at being made to move again. Thomas stretched, his back cracking. Parker yawned, rubbing at his eyes. Foster walked up the stairs, going over to the control room where the security camera monitor was. He sat down at the keyboard, clicking through the various cameras. The screen cycled through different views of the base, showing streets and buildings. A smile emerged on his face as he saw that the base was nearly devoid of zombies. The feeds showed empty streets, clear pathways. A couple of stragglers came across the screen, but the numbers were so low and they were spread thin that a single man with a knife could deal with them. One zombie wandered near the motor pool, another by the mess hall. Isolated threats, easily managed, nothing like the horde they had faced earlier. Relief washed over the captain, as this battle was nearly at an end. They had done it, reclaimed Nellis from the dead. He pulled out the radio, changing the channel and clicking it on. "Private Carver, do you copy?" Foster asked. The response came back quickly, the young soldier's voice carrying relief and excitement. "I'm here, Captain. Are you okay?" "I could see that explosion from here," Carver asked. Foster smiled at the concern in Carver's voice. The private had been alone on that rooftop, watching and waiting. "We're okay, Carver. I just wanted to let you know that we got the base nearly cleared. We're back at the command center and are going to get a few hours of sleep in," Foster said. There was a pause on the other end, then Carver's eager response came through. "What do you need me to do?" Carver asked. "I appreciate the eagerness, Private, but the only thing you need to do right now is get some sleep," Foster said. He clicked the radio again, continuing his instructions. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tasks. "When the sun comes up, we're going to come get you and get you onto base," Foster said. Carver's voice came back warm, filled with emotion. "It'll be nice to be home again," Carver said. "I'm glad you feel that way, because we're going to turn this place into a stronghold," Foster said. The private's enthusiasm was clear through the radio, ready for whatever came next. "I can't wait, Captain," Carver said. Foster leaned back in the chair, feeling the weight of command settle on his shoulders. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. "Get you some rest, Private, because tomorrow is going to be a long day." Chapter 8. The morning sun was high in the sky as Hanson, Parker, and Thomas walked out through the front gate of the base. The heat was already building, promising another scorching day in the desert. The music on top of the warehouse a couple hundred yards away continued to blare, keeping the attention of the zombies by it entranced. The speakers pumped out a steady beat, the sound carrying across the open space. The zombies swayed to the noise, drawn by the only stimulus they could process. Their arms reached toward the building, fingers grasping at air. Each man had long pieces of metal that had been filed down to a point at one end, some material they found on base as they rode around to pick off the remaining stragglers. The metal bars were 6 feet long, and more than sufficient to pierce through skulls. The points gleamed in the sunlight, sharp and deadly. The 3 men walked casually towards the zombies, of which there were a dozen. The creatures were so focused on the music that they didn't notice the soldiers coming up behind them. With a nod to one another, the soldiers moved forward, thrusting their makeshift spears into the backs of zombies' heads, dropping them to the ground. The metal punched through bone with wet cracks, the zombies collapsing without a sound. Their bodies hit the pavement, lifeless once more. The music above was so loud that the other nearby zombies were unaware that their comrades had been struck down, making them easy prey as well. The soldiers moved methodically, working their way through the small group. With a few more swift and decisive moves, the zombie threat was removed. Bodies littered the ground around the warehouse, blood pooling on the concrete. The remaining zombies were all down, none left standing. Hanson wiped the end of his spear on a dead zombie's shirt, cleaning the blood and gore. "Keep an eye out for stragglers," Hanson said. The 2 privates nodded as Hanson knocked on the door of the warehouse. His knuckles rapped against the metal surface, the sound barely audible over the music. A moment later, Private Carver opened it up. He poked his head out, seeing the dead zombies on the ground. The young soldier's eyes went wide, taking in the carnage. A dozen bodies, all dispatched cleanly and efficiently. "You guys don't mess around, do you?" Carver asked. Hanson grinned, leaning against the doorframe. His posture was casual, like they had just finished a routine task. Not when we know there's breakfast waiting on us, Hansen said. The private let out a laugh as he tossed out a bag to the sergeant. The canvas bag sailed through the air, Hansen catching it easily. He opened it up, revealing 8 items wrapped up in foil. The smell of food hit him, making his stomach growl. Breakfast tacos, egg and potato. It's powdered eggs, but trust me when I say, you won't be able to tell the difference, Carver said. Hansen peered into the bag, the aluminum foil reflecting the sunlight. His mouth watered at the prospect of hot food. "Oh, I can't wait," Hansen said. He pulled the radio from his vest, clicking it on. The device crackled to life, ready to transmit. "All right, Cap, we got the goods. We're headed your way," Hansen said. Foster's response came back clear, his voice carrying satisfaction. "The gate will be open," Foster said. Hansen replaced the radio before motioning for the others to start heading back to base. As they began moving, the large warehouse door began to open, Private Carver hitting the button from the inside. The metal door rolled up on its track, revealing the transport truck inside. The 3 soldiers moved quickly across the field, glancing back to see Carver driving the transport truck filled with supplies towards the base. The vehicle rumbled forward, its diesel engine loud. Boxes and crates were stacked in the cargo area, secured with straps. It took a few minutes before everybody was safely through the front gate, the captain locking it up tight afterwards. The chain rattled as Foster secured it, making sure nothing could follow them, and Carver stopped beside the guard shack, looking down to Foster from the elevated cab. "Morning, Captain. The sergeant has your breakfast," Carver said. Foster walked over to the truck, his hand shielding his eyes from the sun. "I appreciate that, Carver," Foster said. The private gestured toward the loaded truck bed, boxes stacked high. "Where do you want me to park this thing?" Carver asked. "Thomas, why don't you hop in and head over to the mess hall? Start getting things unloaded," Foster said. Thomas stepped forward, then paused. His expression showed he had other priorities first. "I will, but not before I get my breakfast," Thomas said. He motioned to Hansen for his breakfast tacos, his hand extended expectantly. The sergeant let out a laugh as he pulled 2 from the bag, handing them over. The foil was still warm, heat radiating through the wrapping. "It's almost like you don't trust me, Thomas," Hansen said. Thomas took the tacos, holding them protectively. His grin was playful, knowing exactly what he was doing. "You got it all wrong, Hansen. I do trust you, but I also know that temptation can be a cruel temptress, so I'm doing my part to unburden you," Thomas said. He held up the tacos for a moment before jogging around to the other side of the truck, jumping in. The door slammed shut, and a moment later, the truck pulled away. As they drove off, the 3 other soldiers stood there, taking their tacos and diving into them. Foster unwrapped his first one, the steam rising as he pulled back the foil. He took a bite, the eggs and potatoes seasoned perfectly. Carver had been right. You couldn't tell they were powdered. "So, what's first on the agenda today, Cap?" Parker asked. He spoke between bites, savoring the hot food. Foster swallowed, considering the day ahead. "We need to get that neighborhood cleaned up. Make sure that those ones you cut in half are down for the count, then get the houses cleared," Foster said. Hansen nodded, thinking about the work ahead. The neighborhood had taken the brunt of their assault, bodies scattered throughout the streets. "That shouldn't be too big of a deal. The general was thorough, so I can't imagine they left anybody behind," Hansen said. Foster shook his head, his expression becoming more serious. "It's not just zombies we need to clear out," Foster said. Parker looked confused, trying to understand what else would need clearing. The houses were empty, evacuated when the base was compromised. "What are you talking about, Cap?" Parker asked. Foster finished his first taco, crumpling the foil into a ball. He looked toward the residential area, thinking about what needed to happen. "Well, we're going to start bringing other survivors in, and they're going to need a place to stay, which means we're going to have to go through and take out any family stuff that's in there," Foster said. Hansen and Parker looked at the captain in a confused manner. The request seemed odd, almost unnecessary given everything else that needed doing. "You want us to take down the family photos?" Parker asked. Foster nodded, understanding their confusion but firm in his reasoning. "I do. Family photos, awards, anything that might remind the new occupants of the people who lived there before them," Foster said. Hansen wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, his brow furrowed. "Cap, There's a lot to get done. That doesn't sound like much of a priority, Hansen said. Foster's expression became more pointed, wanting them to understand why this mattered. His voice carried conviction. We're soldiers. We're better suited to deal with all this. The civilians we're bringing in are already going to be traumatized. I want to do what we can to limit their distractions. And seeing the smiling faces of the dead people who used to own that home is a hell of a distraction. And one we can clean up in just a few minutes, Foster said. Hansen and Parker exchanged a glance before nodding in agreement. When he put it that way, it made sense. The small gesture could make a big difference for people who had already lost everything. We'll take care of it, Cap, Hansen said. Foster's expression softened, grateful they understood. Thanks, Hansen. Why don't you two get over there and get started on it? I gotta give Mike a call, Foster said. Hansen and Parker nodded, walking over to a golf cart, jumping in and driving off. The electric motor hummed as they accelerated. Heading toward the residential area, Foster ate the rest of his breakfast taco before pulling out the cell phone. He looked at the device, still amazed that the network was functioning. With a few quick button presses, it rang. "You got Midnight Mike," came the cheerful greeting. Foster smiled at the DJ's enthusiasm. The man never seemed to lose his energy. "Hey Mike, it's Foster," Foster said. Mike's voice came back warm, genuine relief in his tone. "Good morning, Captain. Glad to hear you made it through another night," Mike said. Foster looked around the base, at the buildings they had fought so hard to reclaim. The sun shone on clean streets, empty of threats. "It was a long one for sure, but we're alive and kicking, not to mention fully in charge of Nellis," Foster said. Mike's excitement came through clearly, his voice rising. "Hell yeah, that's what I like to hear. Do you want me to get the gladiators to bring up your pilot?" Mike asked. "Not yet," Foster said. "Okay, just tell me what you need and I'll make it happen," Mike said. Foster paced slightly, organizing his thoughts. The plan was coming together, but they needed the right people. "Well, Mike, our current plan is to reinforce some of the transports that are here on base and start going around and picking people up," Foster said. Mike let out a slight chuckle, already knowing where this was going. "So you need some crazy people who want to drive around a zombie-infested city? Are you sure you don't want me to call the gladiators?" Mike asked. Foster let out a laugh before continuing. "The gladiators would definitely be involved, but not yet." "Oh, they're definitely at the top of my list for that job. But right now, we need some help getting the transports ready to go. Mechanics and welders would be nice," Foster said. There was a pause on the other end, Mike thinking through his network of survivors. Then his voice came back confident. "It's a bit of a haul, probably 5-6 miles from you, but I got 4 guys who are holed up at a custom car place," Mike said. "Yeah, that'll do the trick," Foster said. Mike's voice carried satisfaction, happy to make the connection. "I'll give them a call, then text you the information. Are you planning to go over today?" Mike asked. Foster looked up at the sun, gauging the time. They needed to get the neighborhood sorted first. "Probably after lunch," Foster said. Mike's response came with obvious pleasure, his voice warm. "Perfect. And speaking of, I got a nice hearty stew simmering as we speak," Mike said. "Glad you're enjoying the food, Mike," Foster said. The DJ's voice carried gratitude, almost emotional. "More than you know, Foster, more than you know," Mike said. Foster clicked the phone off, pocketing it as he pulled out his other breakfast taco. He stood there, opening it up and savoring it as a light breeze hit him. The wind was cool against his skin, a welcome relief from the heat. He closed his eyes, letting it wash over him, just trying to enjoy the moment before kicking off another day in the zombie apocalypse. The end.